This recipe, gorgeous. It really works. You're gonna like this. Today I'm going to be making pound cake. Not my recipe. This is an old recipe. Now this is, you know how I am. I like to research the recipes. I like to give a little history on what's going on there. Where did the recipe come from? Well, I'm going to be taking this recipe from a cookbook that was written, I got my crib notes here. It was written in 1796. I'm going to show you the notes in a moment. That was not when this recipe was invented, but it's one of the early records of when it was actually written down. And the cookbook that it was written down in was actually a cookbook that was formative to the United States. It's listed in the Library of Congress, and it's set into a very special section of books, books that were listed as formative to the United States of America. So this is an important niche when you get right down to it. Now, so you'll know, my crib notes, it's an actual photograph of the cover of the book that I'm talking about. So, you know, since we're going to get into this pound cake, let me give you some history on it. Pound cake was originally invented, it is believed, in the early 1700s, somewhere in North Europe. Nobody has it really nailed down to what nation. Well, the United States was busy going through its revolution. And that ended in 1783. And so, you know, from, what was it? From 1775, if I remember right. Yeah, the year before our Declaration. And from 1775 through 1783, we had the Revolutionary War. And I believe that it was somewhere during that time that Amelia was actually probably born, okay? This book, I believe that she probably wrote when she was in her early 20s. I have no proof of that. There is no evidence of that. But there is evidence of what was going on at the time. And there were a lot of orphaned babies because a lot of mommies and daddies were killed during a very violent time in American history, our own Revolutionary War. Folks, let me read to you this cover page, okay? I'm going to read the whole thing so you'll understand where this recipe comes from. And this is important. It's part of history. I recommend that you go to the Library of Congress, look this book up, and so you'll know the name of the book is American Cookery, and the author, Amelia Simmons. Do not confuse this with the James Beard book of American Cookery. Not the same thing. This was the original that's a couple of hundred years old. All right, so here's the whole thing, beginning to end. American Cookery, or the art of dressing viands, fish, poultry, and vegetables, and the best modes of making pastes, puffs, pies, tarts, puddings, custards, and preserves, and all kinds of cakes, from the imperial plum to plain cake, adapted to this country and all grades of life. By Amelia Simmons, an American orphan. Published according to Act of Congress. Hartford. Printed by Hudson and Goodwin for the author. 1796. Folks, that's a lot of history there. There's one word you may not know, viands. That was a way of saying, without saying what it is, food products. Okay? You know, you could say that a piece of cake would be a viand. Okay? Just another way of saying food products. And Amelia American orphan. It was interesting that she put that on the cover, and I think that that was a great deal of her formation in life, of how she came up in life, and how she was affected and changed in life. And the first pages of that book really spell out a lot, and really will truly open your eyes to what it was like for an orphan at that time. So I've also printed out the recipe itself, so you'll know this is exactly the way it's written in that cookbook. 1 pound sugar, 1 pound butter, 1 pound flour, 1 pound or 10 eggs, rose water 1 gill, spices to your taste. Watch it well. It will bake in a slow oven in 15 minutes. There's a few things there that may seem confusing to you. The first one is what is a gill? Now, rose water, it's something that's used a little bit, was much more popular back then. It's simply rose petals that were steeped in water, okay? And some people made their own, some people purchased. It was used in cooking sometimes, and also used in remedies. Another thing is, we'll bake in a slow oven in 15 minutes. Well, anybody that's ever baked a cake knows that they're usually around 30 minutes. So why 15 minutes? Well, think about this, folks. This is before 1800. They were using wood-fired stoves. Now, a wood-fired stove, on average, between 650 and 900 degrees, those things are hot, all right? And they're still used today for like cooking pizzas. And a pizza will cook in those things usually in 1.5 minutes. They're really quick. So they're extremely hot. And if you think about it, a gas oven, an electric oven, modern, the burner comes on and off to regulate the heat in the oven. But back then, their wood-fired stove, the wood fire kept burning constantly. They would regulate the heat through dampers, but only to a certain amount. A slow oven would have been a lower temperature oven, but still, that's fast cooking there. And today we're going to be cooking for a little bit longer. So we're going to take this old recipe, and I'm going to try to apply it to modern cooking and use modern best practices. So 1 gill, so you'll know, that's about 1/2 cup. We're not going to use rose water, we'll just use plain water, and this recipe is basic from there. Let's get in the kitchen and let's do this experiment. I want to see how this cooks up. Come on. This recipe relies on weight measures, okay? That's the way it is. It's the way it was written. So I have here my scale, okay? And I need to make sure that this is zeroed. So let's do that. There we go. Now I have it set for pounds and ounces rather than grams. And remember, they weren't using the metric system when this recipe was being used, or when it was invented. So I've got 10 ounces, 12, 14, 1 pound, 0.1 ounce. Okay, so that is very accurate measurement on my eggs. So we'll know that was 8 eggs. Interesting measurement. The older recipe had a different count on it, but it still works out. So we have our eggs. Now I want to move in and measure all of the rest of this. Something I want to mention, if you'll notice, it says high gluten flour. Modernized flour, in other words, flour that had adjusted gluten levels, didn't happen until the late 1800s. And that was when you saw a lot of changes. There was the bleaching processes that were invented in the mid to late 1800s. And a lot of changes happened with flour, going from stone grinding to steel grinding and other things like that. So many improvements happened, but they didn't happen at the time that this recipe was invented or when this one was written in American Cookery. So we use a high gluten flour because it's going to be a little more like reality, okay? And that's what I'm shooting for here. I want to get this cake as close to what she made as possible. And 1 cup at a time, we're going to get some kind of a reading here. So 2 cups gives me 9.7 ounces. Okay, 3rd cup, 14.5. Now my 4th cup, I'll simply shake it in there and we will get some idea of the amount from what I have left over. 15.3, 15.4, 5, come on. 15.8, 15.9, and 1 pound. So I take my 1 pound, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to estimate this flour right now. That is about 1/4 cup that I put out or took out of this. All right. So we get an accurate measurement on this at just a little under or a little over 3 cups. So 1 cup of sugar is about 7 ounces. 14.5 ounces. Now I'm going to make this a little easier on myself. I have a 1/4 cup measure that I will now use. So I have 2 cups of sugar, and it starts with 15.789. 1, so it's pretty much 1/4 cup. All right, just that simple. Here it is, folks. This is the original recipe all measured out. We have the sugar, flour, butter, eggs, some water, and what to flavor it with? Well, this time it's just a little bit of vanilla, just that simple. And it's a very basic, easy to do recipe. Let's see how this works out when we do it by hand and get it in the oven the way it might have been done a long time ago. Before I get busy baking, something I like to get out of the way is to grease and flour my pan. To do this cake, I am doing this recipe for the first time, and I want to learn how it rises and acts, and so I'm using something that gives me predictable results, and that would be a very simple glass 13x9 pan. I've got more fat here than I really need, and so I'm just going to smear a little into the bottom of this and get rid of the excess. And if I needed more, I can use it. But just a little bit of fat, and it doesn't take much. You need a thin coat all over the pan. And the funny thing was is when I was actually in school learning to cook, and taking my classes and everything, it was very interesting to watch my teachers when they would see me preparing things. They would see me doing stuff like this. They'd say, "Hey, where did you learn this?" And I was like, "Dude, I've been doing this since I was a little kid." And so it was hard for my teachers to do a really bang up job with introducing new stuff to me because of how much I had already learned. So what they tried to do was simply to give me projects that challenged me. For instance, a bunch of ingredients. Here, make something with this, and if you do, you get an A, otherwise you fail. So you learn to be very creative with what you're given. And that's how I learned, and that's the reason stuff like this is so natural for me. A little bit of flour, doesn't take a whole lot. I take that flour and just give it a shake. And I'm going to make a bit of a mess on my workstation here, but that'll clean up. I wanted to do this right here to show you how very basic this is. All right, well, there we have it. I'm going to shake out the rest of this flour. I'm just going to turn it upside down and tap it against the edge of the sink to knock out the excess flour. I've noticed that the butter was starting to get fairly soft. I went ahead and pulled it out of its packages and put it right in here. Now I'm using a spatula. I think had this been Amelia doing this, she would have been using a wooden spoon and probably a wooden bowl at the same time. Well, I don't have a wooden bowl, I have stainless, okay? And I don't have a wooden spoon, but I do have rubber spatulas, and those seem to work really well for stuff like this. Now I went ahead and put a cloth under this bowl, and believe it or not, it makes controlling the bowl a lot easier, alright? So give that a shot. If your bowl is sliding all over your counter or your table or wherever you're working it, put the towel under it and see if that'll help. Now, if you'll notice, I haven't just gone crazy on this, but I am starting to work it a little harder and faster. The whole idea here is we want to make this as creamy and soft as possible. A good, creaming the butter well is one of those things that they learned a long time ago really helps when it makes a cake rise up and do well. So I have a very smooth, creamy, quite spreadable kind of butter right now. This is lovely, and it's just what I'm looking for. I'm going to start adding in the sugar now. After I get the sugar fully incorporated, then I start working on the other ingredients. And I only do this in just certain amounts. You don't want to overdo it. So I take a little bit of sugar and start working it in. Something that you should understand and remember when working a recipe like this, go ahead and scrape that bowl down. And I recommend you use a spatula the way I am. You could do it with a wooden, but you just don't get that kind of cleaning the bowl with a wooden spoon. Now, I've worked that in. Cream it for a moment. And see, all I'm doing is just bringing this down and across and up. And I'm doing it quickly. It makes it softer, a little more workable, and that's how we're going to work this cake out. Remember, this is best practices, and the best practices on making a cake, you cream the butter and then cream the sugar into that butter and then work the other ingredients into that. It's been done that way for a long time when it comes to good baking. So that's what I'm going to do. If you would, please do yours. I am just going to kind of speed through this by cutting forward to the end of my sugar. The sugar is fully incorporated, and I went ahead and beat this for about another minute, maybe a minute and a half. I'm not going to kill myself because I don't do a lot of baking like this anymore. Normally I use a mixer, but I thought it would be fun just to show it being done by hand for a change. So what I'm going to do, put my egg right down in there. Not all of it, just some. There we go. I'm going to break those yolks. Kind of get them beat a little bit. Get some flour in this. Okay. So here's where it gets messy. In the same way with a mixer, that when you put the flour in, it can fly everywhere if you're not careful. You just kind of got to slow down a little bit and start working it easily and gently. It will come together. About got it all mixed together. Look at that. That looks like a pretty decent batter to me. All right. But the big question is, how well will this bake up? All right. So let me smell. God, that smells so very good. Okay, I think I have a good thing going right here. I'm going to take this, place it right into my pan. We're going to get it into that oven, 350 degrees, and I'm just going to let it cook until it looks beautifully puffed up and just about right. I'm going to then test it with the toothpick test. Stick a toothpick in it. If it comes back out and it's dry, it's finished. But if it's wet and it got batter on it, it still needs cooking. So that's how we tell. This is ready to go. I need to get it in there. Let's do that next. Well, there we go. Let's go ahead and get that spread in there really nice and even, and then it'll be time for the oven. It's a little bit firm, not bad, but a bit firm for most of the pound cakes that I've done in the past were a little bit softer than this, but that doesn't always mean anything at all. So let me get it spread and kind of evened, and then we'll get it in the oven. Time for this to hit the heat. There we go. It's a matter of giving it time. I'm going to check it in 20 minutes and see how it's doing, and then just keep an eye on it from there. After that, I'll be able to tell you about how long this takes. The ingredients quantities for the cake that we have put together today, I used 8 eggs. These are extra large eggs, okay? So they were, these are large, not extra large. 8 large eggs. I used 2 1/4 cups of sugar, 3 1/4 cups of flour, 1 pound of butter, a 1/2 cup of water, also known as 1 gill of water, 4 ounces, and 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. This has been about 35 minutes. Now I'm going to test. I tested earlier in a couple of spots, and it had batter still wet. That felt firm. Came out dry. Nothing on it. I need to let this cool, so I'm just going to transfer it to this pan rack over here, and that will allow the heat to dissipate quickly. Being on this stove, it'll just keep it warm longer. I can make large pieces by making a single center cut and then some cross slices, or I could make smaller pieces by doing 2 side cuts, like one here and one here. I think that's what I'm going to do. Now this has had enough time that the dish is cool. It's still warm in the center, but it's not hot, like difficult to touch. It was about a 30-minute cool down period. All right. Well, let's see here. I want to just tear one of these open, kind of break it open. Now, I'll admit it's a little heavier than I would have first expected. Not quite as much rise as I'd hoped for, but you know, I wasn't too surprised since it didn't have a leavening in it. Okay. Okay, I can't talk too bad about it. I'll be honest with you, I think I can make a better pound cake, but this is a fabulous recipe, and this is the original recipe. This could be built on. We could add in a little baking powder. It'll puff up. That's fantastic. Folks, I've got a pound cake recipe here that's really cool. It's the original pound cake. It's delicious, and it's something that you really need to try. So please do. Also, if you would, please take a look at the rest of my channel. Lots of recipes there. Please subscribe if you haven't done it. Down in the comments, please list something there. And also in the description box down there, you're going to find some links. Links to my website, links to this recipe, so you can just go there and download the recipe. There's a lot of recipes there, and they're really worth your time. They're laid out beautifully. There's the way they're done is, well, it's better than most cookbooks because it gives you a place to write your notes. It makes it easier to follow the instructions because they're laid out and numbered, and also the ingredients are easier to read the way I've laid them in. Folks, take a look at that. Great stuff there. Thank you for watching Texas Cooking Today, and if you would, please have a good day. Bye-bye.